So this is a nice simple Cornish river scene. I'm going to show you all of the techniques and tips to create this picture step by step in this tutorial coming up. Okay, we've got a nice Cornish river scene to do with a bit of a boat in there. I've kept the drawing quite simple. It's always best to simplify it. I'll pop a photo of the photograph and the drawing on my community page. But basically I've got the hill line, a rough idea of where this house is, the trees, the land coming up to the river, just one boat, the water's edge, a few ripples, and then where the seaweed comes here. So nice and simple. I'm going to start with the sky. I'll talk you through the colours as we're going. I'm going to wet the sky using a Saunders Waterford paper, coming down to the hill and over those trees at the back. We can pop those in at the same time. So I've got a round number 10 and I'm coming into some cobalt blue. That cobalt blue was half a teaspoon of water to a pea-sized blob of paint, and I'm just going to come in a circular motion. Just to get a nice sky started. And rinse that brush out, load it with water. I'm going to dab into a little bit of cerulean blue as well. So I've got a variety in the sky. That circular motion just makes the clouds really easily. Take some of that cerulean blue into the cobalt, so you've got that nice mix. I'm going to come over where the trees are as well. With a little bit of kitchen towel, you can lift out a couple of sharper clouds. So I've just screwed it up into a ball and I'm coming in, dabbing, and then you want to twist at the same time so that you get a different dab every time. It's quite nice to leave some of them soft and some of them harder, so you've got a mix here. So I can take out a couple. If it flows back, then it's too wet. You can also do this with cotton buds. Cotton buds work quite nicely. Just to take out little clouds. And then I've got around number 6, I'm going to take a dab of sap green, a tiny dab of sepia into that. So I'm just looking for a more natural green. You want it to be pretty much nearly neat. Not hardly any water in there because we're going to come on. So I'm going to be carefully with around number 6 coming round the roof line and just dabbing in, dab dab dab, to create these distant trees. The dab 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 motion just means that you're leaving bits of sky, which is what you want to do. You don't want to fill the whole paper. These are more sparsely foliaged trees. The round number 6 just means you can get round the roof line nice and easily. If it flows too much, it's too wet. So you just wait a minute. Or you've put water into the paint. It's usually one of the two things. It needs to be pretty much neat. coming down around the house and down to the line of the grass basically. With a long thin rigger, I just want you to dab a little bit of sepia, not too much water. You're just going to pop in a few trunks. Just see at that bottom edge some dark. Again, you're keeping it quite thick so it doesn't flow too far. Okay, and then I'm going to come into the beach area whilst that's drying off. So I'm coming in with some water. Over the sand and over the seaweed. I've got some raw sienna here, which I've just taken a dab of water in. It was just a little blob. I'm just going to bring that across. That's with round number 10. I'm going to swap down to round number 6. If I take a dab of the cobalt blue, you can see that. Let me just move that a bit over here. Dab of the cobalt blue and then a dab of the burnt sienna into that. What I'm looking for is a grey. Then that grey I can just sweep in to start to create the stony texture. If it flows a little bit, that's good. We want it to do that. Can you see how I'm keeping that sort of 45-degree line that's on the photograph? A little bit more of that blue and a little bit more of the burnt sienna. And I'm just going to run a little bit on that edge. So this is on the edge of the water. So it's going to start to create a nice sense of shadow. I'll take a little bit in there as well. Then I've got some of that green left, which I'm going to bring in to start to create the seaweed. So that is sap green and a dab of sepia. It's still going into wet, using my number 6. Vary the strokes that you're doing, just the pressure. It wants to look random. That sepia in there will just knock back the green, and actually the sepia is quite granulating, so it'll give it a bit of texture as well. There's always a reason that I've chosen a colour that I have. Bit by bit you'll learn all of this. It's just a lot to take in at the very beginning. I'm going to take a little bit more of a dab of sepia in and just bring that through so that I've got a variety in there, so it's a little bit darker in places. And then I've rinsed my brush off. I can dab into the sepia itself. Just I'm dabbing it off a little bit on the kitchen towel, and we're just going to dot in a few stony bits. This is random bits of stone. Again, it's all giving it bits of different texture. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so that's nicely dry now. I'm going to come in with a round number 6 and just pop a bit of water on these distant hills. Again, I'm simplifying this. Don't need to get all of the detail in. I'm going to do this in one big section. So this is sap green. Just mind around your boat. That's why I'm using a number 6. You don't want to come onto your sail if you can help it. And just bringing this sap green all the way down here. Around the edge of your sail. There's a little bit in the middle as well. I'm just going to pop that in there. Then I'm going to use that mix of sap green and sepia just to pop a bit of shadow in. If I dab into the sepia, I'm just going to run that along the bottom edge because it's like a bit of a wall. So it's just all simplifying this. And then I need a darker green. So I'm just going to use a little bit of Viridian. Any sort of green that's fairly dark will do, or you can use something like intense blue and a bit of burnt sienna in there to get a nice thick natural green. And that's really thick on there, and then I can just come in whilst that hill's still wet and get a line of trees in here with ease. Basically it's going to soften in that bottom section. I can just do a nice edge. So if you don't mix the colour well, you'll get bits that are brighter, but actually that can work quite nicely. As you'll see, I've got a brighter bit there. Dabbing into those different colours does still work. So it's got a little bit fresher there, and then there's a little bit here. It's got a bit of a shrub, and a little bit this side. Now these are going to have a harder edge because they're coming across the building, but that's fine. A mixture of hard and soft works. So you just got to make sure you've got a nice sort of dabby edge there. If I take this round number 6 and dip it back into the sepia loaded, I'm just going to pop my finger there and just pop a few bits of texture on. So I'm hitting my finger and just getting a few little bits of texture, added texture on that beach. So the boat, we've got a blue. I'm going to use cobalt blue for the base. You want to keep it nice and fine. And then we're going to use cerulean blue when we go into the water. So I've got a little bit of this raw sienna left. So if I now come on to the roof line, just resting on my little finger as I'm going, then I'm going to dip into the sepia, just run that, so this is wet onto dry, so this is just running. When it's a small area, just get that nice shadow there. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off now. Okay, so that's nicely dried. I'm going to take a little bit of raw sienna, slightly lighter, onto the sides of the building. Just so I've started that off. Then I'm going to come into the water while that's drying. So I want a wash brush first. I'm just popping a bit of water either side. What I've got to be careful of is protecting the white reflection of the sail. So to do that, I'm just not going to wet that middle area, and I'll show you what I'm going to do as I get there. Because I want the colour to look different than the boat, I'm going to come on with cerulean blue. So we're going to start into the wetter areas, and this is just with a round number 10. Use whichever brush you're comfortable with. You've got to get into the detailed areas, so I'm going to swap down to a number 6 in a minute. But I just want you to get the blue in first of all. But just into the wetter areas. You bring it all the way down. And you're going to try to leave the little bits of white. So I'm going to create those shapes that I can see. So with these little fiddly bits around the sail, you can always drop down to a number 6. I've managed, but it was a little bit fiddly. So I'm just rinsing my brush off. I'm going to dip in to some of the raw sienna, because there's some of the raw sienna still showing within the water. So we're just going to sweep some of that through that bottom section, just where you can see it. I'm going to swap down to a number 6. So around number 6 I'm going to dip into the blue and a bit of the burnt sienna. So I've got a bit of a grey. I'm just going to sweep through, keeping it quite horizontal, some soft ripples. We're going to do soft ripples and hard ripples. Also get a little bit of reflection in places. The grey works well for this. A little bit of a reflection from things that are on the bank. Okay, so that's dry now. So if I just pick up a bit of sepia on my number 6, I can come into this section here, just darken off that side of the building. There's also a bit on the roof here. Just use whichever brush you're comfortable with. At this point my students would drop down to a number 2. And I've got a dark edge on the roof line. Just pop in there. Clean dry brush, just lift out a little bit of light on the top of that edge of the roof. Just a tiny dab of sepia just to pop a bit of shadow. In fact, you can drag the sepia down from the roof there just to create that little bit of shadow there. So I have got a little bit of water that I've missed in between the boat and the sail, so I'm just going to take a little bit of cerulean blue in, just for that in between section. And now I'll dry that one off. Okay, so that's nicely dry now. I've got a small flat and I'm going to pick up some of the blue and the burnt sienna to make a grey. Now it's important that this isn't too strong. I'll just show you on this piece of tester. You don't want this to be too strong. You're going to come with a layer over to create these ripples on the water, but you don't want it to be too stripy. So if I come in now, I'm going to start horizontally and just start to break in. Can you see I'm keeping my brush horizontal, but I'm making sweeps through. So you keep your brush horizontal, but you drag up and down. And this makes this lovely sort of sweeping wave ripple. I'm avoiding that section here because some of this is blue, so I'm going to bring a couple over, but some of them are going to be blue ripples. As you get further away, you want them to be really flat and delicate. In fact, hardly any. You want to phase them out. It's a really nice effect. If something goes a bit array, that one's a bit array, just dab it off a bit, fade it out a bit. It's always quite good to get them just behind the boat where the boat's flowing as well. It sort of grounds the boat into the water or onto the water. And just flow through. That's working really nicely. Just rinse that brush off, and then I'm going to pick up some of the cerulean blue and just break through with a few ripples in the cerulean blue, especially through this section. So I'm just dabbing horizontally really. That just breaks that area up. You can take a few on, just to add a bit of variety into the water. I love doing water. Between skies and water, my favourite things to do. You can see you've got a really nice reflection happening there with the boat sail. And then we have got a tiny little person on the boat, so this is optional. The boat could be moored, you don't have to put a person on or anchored. What I've done is just dabbed some sepia and rose together. It's just what I've got on my palette. And when you're doing a person, always do them smaller than you think and just follow the shape. So I'm just popping a little shape in here. Nothing too complicated. There's a tiny, tiny, tiny little person there. Okay, so I've just brought this closer because what often happens is you realise you've missed a bit when you finish the picture, and I've missed a bit of blue again on the water. So I think I've placed my boat slightly lower than the original photo. So I need to fill this in so that I've got the line of white and a line of white that way. So I've just popped in a little bit of blue, and it gives you a close-up of my tiny little person. So there we go, I've taken the tape off and you can see the final result. It's again a simple one for a beginner. It appears quite complex when you look at it, but broken down into sections it is relatively simple. It gives you a chance to have a go at a little boat, a chance of a reflection, and also of buildings and trees. So it's a lovely scene to do. If you've enjoyed this one, I'll pop you a link to another beginners one here and a playlist here for beginners. And I shall see you next time.